Hi, everybody. Happy May.
Happy May to you. So coming in.
Hey, Carol, it's nice to see you. We missed you last month. Debbie, tell me when we should start.
Wait a couple minutes. I know Rena Seidman sends her regrets because she had a conflict today. But I looks like Rena Goldenberg is here. I know she wasn't sure she could make it, but glad to see her join. Don't know about anybody else sent out something yesterday. So and I'm just thinking.
Debbie, I'm here. I'm here.
I see.
Okay.
And I'm just paying attention to the and there's nobody waiting to be admitted right now, so I guess we can go ahead and get started, and if people come in, I will let them in.
Great. So welcome, everybody. Happy May. Just as a warm-up, I don't know, why didn't everybody share one thing that you've read or listened to or watched recently that you like that you would recommend to the rest of us?
Oh, boy.
Because we all need recommendations.
Does it have to be Judaic? Because
No.
okay, all right.
I'll jump in something that I have been reading this book called The Hidden Palace, which is about, I think the woman who wrote it is Helen Weichert. And she also wrote a book called The Golem and the Genie, which maybe other people know. And I'm not sure how, I haven't read that one yet. This is the one that came up, and I'm just having so much fun with this fancifulness of golems and genies interacting in New York City. It's just a hoot. Very entertaining.
Nice. Any other recommendations for us?
Well, we are reading for our Israeli literature group, The Trumpet in the Wadi, which is amazing. And those of you who are in that group, if you haven't read it, you should pick it up. We have Luther and Chaya who do an Israeli literature book group for us, so it's wonderful. And there's a movie that we just watched, which is not quite as good as the book, but excellent.
Okay. This is Steve Brody. I'm a devotee of audiobooks on my walks and kayaking and that sort of thing. I just finished The Revolutionary, which is a fascinating biography of Samuel Adams. Most of us know them as from the beer, which actually the family was in the brewing business. But the history behind his seminal role in our Revolutionary War is mind-boggling.
Nice.
And I also finished David McCullough's The Wright Brothers just a day or so ago, and talk about two incredible individuals, three actually, the two Wright brothers and their sister Catherine. An incredible story. And if anybody's into serious, wants to have belly laughs nonstop, Jerry Seinfeld's Is This Anything audiobook with him narrating and telling the jokes is great if you just want a diversion.
Nice. Any other one or two more? Yeah, Mim.
I've been rehearsing Mendelssohn's Elijah, and we're putting it on Georgetown Chorale next Saturday night, 7 o'clock, Church of the Epiphany. It's a text you might want to know a little bit about. It's also a lot of fun.
Maybe one more. Yeah, Myrna. You're mute.
I just finished The Diamond Eye, which is about a female Russian sniper during World War II. Probably not even 5 feet high, had the highest number of kills in the Soviet or the American sniper people. Amazing, and struck up a relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who became a buddy, a pen pal. They visited each other. Who knew? I mean, and now I'm reading Karski, which is a marvel. He was a hero. He was a Polish courier whose mission it was to tell the world about the Jews, because he witnessed it. Even in Belgium, he got into the camp and got out again. Amazing what people, just amazing.
So I recently binge listened to a podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, which was fascinating. The podcaster is a woman who grew up in the Hillsborough Baptist Church, which is the one that was doing the horrifying protests at funerals, like the vicious anti-gay protests. And she left the church, but it left her really, really interested in questions of how people get really, really convinced of things, how people change their minds. And it's, even if you're not Harry Potter people, I am not a, dyed in the wool Harry Potter person. It's just this wonderful piece of like investigative journalism and cultural commentary. I commend it to you. So welcome back to Bereshit, first verse. I'll just remind you all that last month we looked at Rashi's commentary on the first verse. And I think what I want to bring back, oh wait, let me put this link to the sheet in the chat. Hold on one sec. Oops. Okay, the link is in the chat. Yeah, Frank. You're mute.
Going back to your previous question about what people have been reading, I've been interested in what AI, artificial intelligence, is going to do to us. And I found a very interesting article that I put in the chat by a guest writer for The Economist, recent article. So if you weren't concerned about AI, read the article and you'll be concerned about it now.
Great, thank you. When we looked at Rashi's comment, what I want to remind you that he does is he starts out by saying, the first comment he makes is that Bereshit, that first word of the Torah, is we can best understand if we know that elsewhere in the Torah, elsewhere in Tanakh, Torah is called the Reshit, the first thing or the primary thing, and Israel is called Reshit. So if you really want to know what Bereshit means, it means that for the sake of Israel and for the sake of Torah, God created the world. But he says, if you really want a pshat, if you want a pshat understanding, I'll give you that as well. And then he goes to a more granular grammatical reading. So what I want to do is just look briefly at what Ibn Ezra does on this verse, and then we're going to go on to the next one. I'll put it up on the screen. Oh, Debbie, you need to make me a co-host. Or does everybody see it on another screen? Do I need to share it? Give me a thumbs up if you need to see it on the screen.
What are you talking about? What is it?
Yeah.
The source sheet.
Yeah, I
was
see.
looking
It's
at from
in
the chat you had, yeah?
What you put in the chat is only the Hebrew verses and
Oh,
no
whoops.
commentary.
Sorry about that.
No, I see English.
I saw a little English. but I don't know if that's.
Oh, yeah,
There,
that's a little.
try it now. Oh, wait, here.
I see just a little, you're right. It's only a little English. Okay.
Here it is with the English.
Okay. What am I supposed to be looking at or finding?
So there's a link in the chat,
Okay.
which will
Safaria?
take you to the source sheet.
Is that Safaria?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, I have to go to the other one. Okay.
Okay, did you give me sharing
I
privileges?
did.
Great, okay.
It should work now. I just.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, okay. I see it.
Okay, but I'll share it. Okay. Now everybody can see it. So Ibn Ezra, will somebody just go ahead and read what Ibn Ezra says again about this weird locution Bereshit? For those of you who weren't here last month, the thing that's strange about the first words of the Torah is that you would expect Bereshit in the beginning to be followed by a noun. In the beginning of creation, in the beginning of the meal, but instead it's followed by a verb. So we have in the beginning, and then we have God created. And what we were talking about is the way, what choices commentators are going to make in kind of solving this grammatical bumpiness. Will somebody go ahead and read what Ibn Ezra says?
Beginning.
In the beginning, our wise men taught that the letter Beit or of Bereshit in the beginning is superfluous. They compare it to the Beit in the word Ba Rishonah at the first, Genesis 13:4. Know the Beit in Ba Rishonah to be superfluous. We would find they shall set forth Rishonah, Numbers 2:9.
Okay, so
However,
stop there.
Okay.
So what's his first? He's going to give us, he's telling us what the Chachamim said. So what earlier rabbinic, one opinion of the earlier rabbinic authorities, and who understands some of what he's saying? We'll crowdsource what he's saying. Somebody just throw it out.
Don't worry about it.
Good. Don't worry about the bet. It's just extra. And how do we know it's extra?
Because other places it was not used. It was not significant.
Beautiful. So we have other places, if we're looking at the word Rishonah, which is related to Reshit, we have one place where it has a bet, another place where it doesn't have a bet, same meaning. Keep going, Bob, please.
However, if this were so, the bet of Bereshit would be vocalized with a long kamatz. So that's a vowel form.
Good. So he's saying no. So he's saying you can't make that analogy because it's spelled differently.
Right.
Keep going.
Different vowel. Other scholars maintain that the word Bereshit is always in the construct, and its meaning in our verses in the beginning of the evening, or of the night, or of the darkness. However, they have overlooked, and he chose a first part, Reshit, for himself. Others say that the Beit.
Wait, stop there for a
Okay,
sec.
okay.
So for those of you who weren't here last month, in Hebrew, nouns there are two forms. They're either in the absolute form, which is a noun all by itself, or it's in the construct where it's connected to another noun. So, and Reshit looks like it's a construct form. So it looks like it should be connected to another noun. So he's saying other scholars maintained that it's always in the construct. So here we have to fill in the beginning of what. But then why does he say they're wrong?
They have overlooked a different place where
Beautiful.
it did.
Good. So they've overlooked a place in Tanakh where Reshit is an absolute noun and doesn't need to be connected to anything else. Keep going for yet another opinion.
Others say that the Beit of Bereshit is a preposition, They explain that scripture intends to preclude the thought that heaven and earth were pre-existing. Hence it states in the beginning.
Okay, stop there. So what's his next possibility?
Somewhere else can go.
This one's a little trickier. Anyone
Well,
get this one?
the but is a preposition. So it has to be, if Reshit is beginning, then Reshit means in the beginning.
Good. And we talked about this a little last week, that in the Middle Ages, this question of whether God creates the world ex nihilo from nothing, or whether God creates the world from pre-existent matter is getting kind of hot. Now, most of your contemporary Jewish translations are going to say God created the world from pre-existent matter. In the beginning of God's creation, the earth was tohu vavohu. But Maimonides is saying, no, 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 a bunch of people are going to read it to assert, absolutely that in the beginning, God created the world, meaning from nothing. And then just finish us off because he's going to tell us what he thinks.
I believe that Bereshit is in the construct, as in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, Jeremiah. Don't ask, how can a word in the construct be connected to a verb in the perfect? This presents no problem, for we find that very case in the verse when the Lord spoke at first with Hosea, and in the verse, the city where David encamped. The meaning of Bereshit will be explained in our comments on the next verse.
Good. So those are two examples in the Bible where you have this construct form of a noun, but it's slammed up against a verb, not up against another noun. So he says that shouldn't get in your way. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So how would you describe Ibn Ezra's project here? And what are the assumptions that underlie it? And Bob, thank you for getting us through that, those three very detailed grammatical examples.
Well, he's trying to simplify things. He's saying, don't make more of it than it appears. There's there's simple explanations. Go for the simple explanation, not the complicated one.
Okay, good. So he's saying we're let's be really concrete in our approach here and figure out what the word means. We're not going to go on in any midrashic business. Good. What else?
He's assuming the language is used the same way all through the Tanakh.
I'm reading a book. I did not recommend it at the beginning because it's a little arcane, but it's called Grammar in the Making of Early Christianity. And it's about early Latin grammars, about which I know nothing. But it's one of the assumptions of this kind of grammatical investigation is that you can understand what a word means in Genesis by looking at a word in Jeremiah. So exactly as Mim just said, that's an assumption that the language doesn't change. Good. What else? What other assumptions are embedded in that? So that there's no change over chronological time. What else?
Elsie,
Yeah.
I was thinking about the image of a telescope, where you can be telescoping in on a single syllable, and then you can telescope out and be looking at the whole compilation of all knowledge, and that you can sort of get lost in this little detail. But if you're looking at everything, the question is, what's the context? Is the context the next word, or is the context the whole opus of knowledge that's there?
So one of the assumptions we're going to see run through all these medieval commentators, whether they're working midrashically like Rashi or they're working grammatically like Ibn Ezra, is, so I'm going to keep that image of the telescope, is that you can zoom in and out and the appropriate context is all of Tanakh. Any other assumptions And what do you make of his saying, okay, here are 3 options, this is the one I go with? Does he prove it? Does he argue it? Like, what's happening rhetorically?
It feels like he discounts everybody else's view. He takes his view, and yeah, that's it. This is
Good. So he's giving you a range of what by then are authoritative positions, telling you why he thinks the others are wrong, and then his is left standing. So what's the view? What is he enacting vis-a-vis the authority of those earlier opinions?
But they don't have that much standing.
Okay, they're wrong,
They are
right? So
wrong.
they don't have much standing.
Right.
And
The other thing
what
I just want to
else?
mention was, he also puts in parenthetically, all the wise scholars or wise men said X. So it's like, well, there may have been a variety of opinion, but everybody who knew what they were doing believed X.
And
There's
their
that feeling.
Chachami may be like a technical term for like the, authoritative sages.
Mm-hmm.
Other things you want to say about his relationship to those earlier authorities, or some of them are actually relatively contemporary?
I was thinking that he may be implying something he didn't actually mean to imply, which is not necessarily, these other authorities were wrong and I'm right, but he may be implying I'm teaching a line of reasoning that other people can use to someday prove me wrong.
Good. There's something, he doesn't just say his own opinion. He says, these are the other opinions. Here's why I think they're not right. Here's my opinion why I think it's right. But Bob, as you're saying, it's he is laying out a methodology for engaging and assessing a range of opinions to assess which one is the most correct. So actually, let's go to the next one. Keep that experience in mind as we move on to his and Rashi's comments on verse 3. Unfortunately, I went to what Ibn Ezra says about verse 2 and that he's going to explain what Breshit bara Elohim means. He doesn't really. So I didn't give it to you. I mean, that he's going to explain what Breshit actually means. So this is Rashi on a couple of words later in the verse. So will somebody else please read just this comment, Rashi, on Genesis 1:1, comment 3?
God, as judge, created. It does not state the Lord, the merciful one, created, because at first God created to create it, the world, to be placed under the attribute rule of strict justice. But he realized that the world could not thus endure and therefore gave precedence to divine mercy, allying it with divine justice. It is to this that what is written in Genesis alludes, in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven.
Okay, good. Thank you. So this, you need a little context here. Hold on. Okay, the way the English comes out is a little confusing. Okay, so who knows, either probably from prior knowledge, what he is inquiring into here? What's his core question? And you just need to shout it out because I'm not seeing you.
Okay, it's the Elohim versus Adonai quandary.
Good. So Mim, talk a little more.
Well, I don't know at what point this was set, but at least by Rashi's time, I guess, Elohim, the Elohim name of God is associated with judgment, and the Yud He Vav He, or the Adonai version of God, is associated with compassion. And this passage happens to have both. And this is a long time before biblical higher criticism. So it happens to have both, and he's explaining why the first sentence has Elohim only, and then it moves on to, the summary of that day, and it says Adonai Elohim. So he says, well, what's that telling us?
Right. So hold on, I'm gonna like this one. I'm trying to get so I can see all of you at once. There we go. Okay. Okay, so give me a thumbs up, middle thumb, or thumbs down if you got what Mim was saying, or if you need more info or context. Okay. So mostly thumbs up, a little bit more context. Okay. So as Mim said, there are two primary names for the God of Israel in Torah. Yod He Vav He, right, that we say as Adonai, and Elohim. And for biblical scholars, we understand Yod He Vav He to be the proper name of the God of Israel, and understand Elohim to be like what we would do when we were to write God with a capital G. However, for the ancient interpreters, that wasn't how they were operating. And they would ask themselves, why does it sometimes say Elohim and why does it sometimes say Yod He Vav He? And as Mim said, they developed this kind of idea or framework that when it says Elohim, that is thinking about God in God's role as giver of judgment. And when it says Adonai, that's in God's role as mercy. So that invites them every time it says one or the other to think, oh, is God being judgy here or is God being merciful? And as Mim said, this little section on the creation of heaven and earth is perfect for them because it starts out with Elohim and ends with Adonai Elohim, kind of prompting this little imagining that first God was going to just kind of create the world from this place of judgment, realize that was a bad idea because we weren't going to be able to withstand that, and kind of finishes up that piece of creating with by combining the two attributes. We're going to come back to it, but I just want you to see what Ibn Ezra does. So will somebody else read this one and I'll tell you when to stop.
This is Steve. I can read this.
Great, thanks.
So right from the top, I assume?
Yep, where it says God, Elohim, God is a plural.
Right, is a plural. We know this because we come across the singular form Eloah. Elohim is employed stylistically. Every language has honorific terminology. In the non-Hebrew tongues, when an inferior addresses a superior, he employs the plural. In Arabic, it is customary for a dignitary, such as a king, to speak in the plural. In Hebrew, too, it is considered a sign of dignity to employ the plural when speaking of a superior. Such is the case with the words Adonim, lords, and Baalim, owners.
Yep.
Thus, scripture says a cruel lord, Adonim, and the owner thereof, Baalav, shall accept it. The terms Alav upon him, Elav to him, and Adav unto him are similar. It is for this reason that scripture reads bara Elohim and not bareu Elohim.
Good. So stop there for now. So what's he interested in about this word Elohim?
Protocol.
But before that, like what about the actual word is worthy of comment for him?
Why is it plural?
Good. So why is the word Elohim, why does it have a plural form? What would be the worst case scenario?
Many gods.
Good, right? Worst case scenario is that it's plural because there are a lot of them. Obviously, even Ezra isn't going to go that route. So how does he explain the plural? I think Luther, did you just say protocol?
Yes, it's like the royal we, and it's usually connotes respect for the other. Although the example here of a cruel lord, that doesn't sound like someone that deserves our respect.
Good. So the reason, so I think, who can somebody help Luther out?
They're all cruel.
You might say all lords are cruel. Okay, good. What else?
I think it's sort of a stretch. He's looking for other examples within the Torah that use plural.
What, so Luther, you started talking about protocol. I might think of respect there both as respect for person, but also as status. So that somebody of a high status, even if they're a horse's ass, right? Still, we still say your majesty. So, and then in the end, lest you go that route that Carol articulated that we know we don't want to go, even Ezra emphasizes that even though Elohim is in the plural, the verb bara is in the singular. So lest you think we were talking about many gods here, the verb lets us know that we're just talking about one. Keep going, Steve, where it says we know from the study of logic.
We know from the study of logic that speech is called safa because it is seen to come from the lips. Similarly, man's highest soul is called heart, lev, even though the soul itself is incorporeal, while the heart is incorporeal, while the heart is corporeal. Am I pronouncing it right?
Corporeal. Yep.
Corporeal. It is referred to in this manner because the heart is its first resting place. Similarly, God is called Elohim because his actions are executed via angels who do his will and who are referred to as Elohim.
Good. This was a surprise. What you need to know here, what he says at the end, is that Elohim has a bunch of meanings in Tanakh. Most of the time, it's a reference to the singular deity, otherwise known as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Sometimes it refers to other deities. In a couple of places, it refers to human judges. And in a couple of other places, it seems to refer to angels or, divine beings subordinate to our Elohim with a capital Aleph. So what's this whole thing? So what's this interpretation of Bereshit bara Elohim? What's he saying here?
By he, we mean, is it Rashi who's?
Ibn Ezra. Now we're on Ibn Ezra, surprisingly.
Oh, Ibn Ezra.
Work out what the analogy is. So what's he saying about Safa and Lev that he's now going to analogize to Elohim? Mim, you're mute.
I'm not sure I see the analogy. Safa, language, comes from sfatayim, which means lips. But language is an abstraction and lips are concrete. Okay. And soul, so to speak, or well, we translated soul. I don't know if he actually would have used that word, but I guess they believe the heart was the seat of something or other that we now translate as soul. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So what's that got to do with it? I don't know.
So if
Isn't it kind
language,
of that, isn't it kind of they work together, the lips and the heart, and that the lips needed the heart, and therefore God needed the angels?
lovely idea. And
That's
I
what
think for him, these are separate examples, but he should have called you because that's actually a beautiful linking of them. So if language is named after the lips, because that's where it comes from, and that's how we literally make language, and our soul or our personness is named after our heart, because that's kind of the concrete location. It's like the SATs. What does it mean then that Elohim, our name for God, is also the name of the angels? So we're saying language is to lips like God is to angels. Or like incorporeal soul is to human heart. Yeah, Luther.
Well, it is making me think of the line that we often chant on Shabbat. That's also from a reggae tune. Let the words of my heart and the meditation of my soul, I think it says, be acceptable in thy sight. And what the analogy, if it's a real analogy, is that the lips act for the Elohim God concept is in the heart. The lips are the messengers, which is the other word we use to describe angels.
So so what he's doing, you all are being more synthetic than he's being. He's saying, example 1, language and lips. Example 2, soul and heart. Example 3, Elohim as God, Elohim as angels. So he's asserting the same relationship between God and the angels as he's asserting between lips and language and physical heart and our souls. You're having trouble getting it because it's kind of radical.
Is this akin to the idea that Moses couldn't see God, but maybe he could see an angel?
Good, good, good. So keep going, Bob.
God was either so dangerous that he could die if he actually saw God's face, or maybe God was just not seeable in that way, but it's possible to see some kind of divine being that is a messenger of God.
Beautiful.
Well, it makes the angels the manifestation of God. But I was thinking how we just did the Haggadah, which makes a point that it was not an angel, that it was not the angel of death. It was not an angel that slew the firstborn of the Egyptians. It was God, God's self. So go figure. But that's just where my mind went at that point.
As well it should have. Good. So remember, Ibn Ezra is living in the golden age of Islamic intellectualism, which is very informed by Greek philosophy, right? So the Greeks, as some of you may have once known, privileged the abstract over the concrete. So for a Jewish theologian in that moment, God in God's purest godness is going to be abstract, transcendent, not mucking around with the elements of the concrete world very much at all. But here, and it's only going to get worse in Genesis 2, we have this assertion that like God made the heaven and the earth, right? If you are this abstract Aristotelian kind of God, that is not how you're spending your time. So what Ibn Ezra is reading back into this is saying the reason it says Elohim isn't because our big dichotomy around the deity is between justice and mercy, the way Rashi does, but behind God in God's most abstract Aristotelian manifestation, and the God that, and the manifestations of deity, of the deity that actually are kind of engaged in the concrete world. So Elohim is reminding us that when we're talking about God being kind of showing up, as Bob was saying, working in our world, that is going to be this Elohim, this angelic, or this kind of lower status, less pure and abstract manifestation of the deity. With me? Okay, so here's my question. Rashi, when Rashi reads this verse, it leads him to think about God's, the balance of judgment and mercy in the deity. When Ibn Ezra reads this verse, it leads him to reflect on the kind of balance of pure abstraction, otherness, and engaged in the worldness of the deity, right? So the very same three words, one might even say just the word Elohim, is taking them in two very different directions. So it's a two-part question. First part is, which of those resonates more with you? And part two is, when you read Bereshit bara Elohim, I'll give you the rest of the verse, Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, right? Where are you led to reflect? What topics does the verse kind of create a trail of breadcrumbs? What topic is at the end of the trail of breadcrumbs for you? Or who do you like better so far, Rashi or Ibn Ezra? Yeah. Elizabeth. You have to unmute. See you, Frank. Wait, does Elizabeth know she has to unmute? There you go.
I'm wondering if it relates to how God works in the world. Because if it was the Elohim that did the work of creating the world, they say that they did God's work. And for me today, I see God's work being done through the things that we do. So.
Lovely. So it invites you to keep thinking about what are the vessels through which divine work happens. So like, what are the lips through which languages are, it's that analogy. Carolyn, Mim, you're muted. I don't know if you're talking to each other or to us.
We were talking to each other. We were looking for the. I may be talking too much, but you know, when I read Rashi and Ibn Ezra, I'm learning about Rashi and learning about Ibn Ezra. I'm not necessarily learning anything about Chumash. I mean, that's the whole point. We have an evolving civilization. And who the heck knows what the Chumash means? But to get a rounded view of Judaism, we're learning what Rashi meant and we're learning what Ibn Ezra meant. And if we could go on into higher criticism and say, well, and what we've got here is two different texts and they've been combined. Da, da, da. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of things it can mean, and it's all interesting, and none of it necessarily has anything whatever to do with what I might believe personally or what I practice. It's all part of the cultural experience, which makes it wonderful.
So I'm test driving a form of a question with you. So you're my guinea pigs. So I've been thinking exactly about what Mim was just talking about. What is the role of studying the commentators in our engagements with Torah? And I am with Mim in that sometimes Ibn Ezra, actually, sometimes I find his grammatical comments actually quite helpful in trying to figure out what the text actually means. But for the most part, especially as they're getting into more theological, or we'll see other comments that are more kind of moral in nature, those comments seem to be, as Mim is saying, telling me much more about Rashi and Ibn Ezra than they are about Torah. And what I'm noticing is that when we look, that's my dog waking, she must be having a nightmare. That's the weird squeaks in the background. If we look at the history of interpretation, what we see is what topics, what reflections get catalyzed by the verse. And I want to just give you an example, and then Debbie, I see your hand. An example from my observations of Torah studies. I was visiting, I think I told you all this, I'm zooming into all sorts of Torah studies. And I was visiting a congregation for Parshat Noach. And the conversation that was happening in the group was about the classic question about Noah, because it says that Noah was tzaddik b'dorotav. He was righteous in his generation. And there's a long standing conversation that goes way back to the rabbinic period of, does that mean he lived a bunch, like the people of his generation were such moral schleppers that he was righteous among them, but on some absolute scale of righteousness, he was not? Or does it mean he was righteous on a scale of righteousness? And the conversation, there was a very interesting conversation ensued about that question. And then somebody raised something in kind of cogitating on this question. Somebody raised something about the environment. And the rabbi said, funny you should say that, because right after here, I'm going to go to the big sanctuary for a bar mitzvah, and the kids' Dvar Torah is all about the environment. So what got enacted there is one set of conversation prompted by Parshat Noach was about this question of human righteousness. And the other direction, and I didn't hear the kids' Dvar Torah, so I don't know what he actually said, but another conversation prompted was an environmental conversation. So I'm interested, as we start to hear what are some of the places these commentators go, to that question that made you all nervous, right? Which is like, where would you go? Where does reflection on this verse, what directions does it catalyze for you? And are you moved by either Rashi's or Ibn Ezra's? Debbie.
So what this realm of questioning raised for me is curiosity about the cultural context in which each of these scholars or commentators operated. It also reminds me a bit of Hillel and Shammai, because Rashi being the Hillel in this case, everybody knows Rashi. Like, they've not everyone knows it but Ezra, but in terms of who's sort of kind of the dominant force over time. So I sort of wondered, what kind of groupies did they have? Who were their followers, and how much of this, how much of an influence was, I mean, sort of the local culture and the local interpretation of halacha among the rabbanim and whomever, the authority figures, that sort of reveals why they may be reading in these particular directions. And I can't help but think that some of it had to do about being in a predominantly Christian world versus predominantly a Muslim world. Maybe I'm wrong, but those are thoughts I had.
Nice. Yeah, Robert.
Like all of us, I mean, they were grappling with the meta question. They were trying to figure out what it all means. And I mean, I think it sort of makes you start thinking on your own. What does it mean? You don't necessarily have to buy into where they landed, but they were really grappling with, if there is a God, that's a big question, but they accepted that there was. What was the nature of God? What was the nature of creation? Where did it come from? We're still trying to figure out, Steve probably knows more than we do about, the Big Bang and all those things. To me, this just is, they're grappling with the same questions I'm grappling with. And I don't have to accept their version, but it certainly makes me think, as I was thinking about, what does this all mean? And the nature of God or godliness or the force of creation, the force of the universe, that, they were, 1,000 years ago, they were grappling with the same thing we do today.
Luther.
One way that I look at it, though, is that even Ezra's whole approach to understanding is detail-oriented, and it's very linear, it's very logical, and it's very precise. Rashi is more holistic and more open, and so it's almost like that false right brain, left brain dichotomy, which doesn't really exist in your neurological system, but it's sometimes a handy metaphor.
Nice. And that loops back to what Debbie was asking. So that Muslim world we were talking about, very much privileged logical argumentation, the observable. And Rashi is living in a world where the Jewish world is still much more in a kind of purely rabbinic, meaning the sages of late antiquity mindset. So Robert, what Robert was saying about, they're thinking about all the same questions. One of the things that I think is that I'm appreciating about this conversation is contemplating creation is for us a catalyst for those big questions, right? If I was reading a recipe for French toast casserole, as I was last night, I read several of them, that did not prompt me to think about the nature of God and the nature of the cosmos, right? It led me to think about what I had in my fridge and like cholesterol. So it feels familiar to me that of all the things that Rashi and Ibn Ezra are going to talk about through the Torah, that it's this moment of contemplating a text that's asking us to imagine the moment of creation, that they go to what for them are among the core existential questions. And it's kind of sweet to me. So I'm warming to Rashi the more I work on this project. because to look at the account of creation and to go to connect it to the question of human fragility and human failing, right? That's not where I go when I think about creation. And that's exactly where Rashi's going. He's saying that if God at the beginning did this from the perspective of strict justice, the world couldn't stand because we can't survive that. So there's something kind of poignant to me. Poignant's the wrong word. Sweet is the right word. That it's also a little anthropocentric, right? So if you were to bring a strict environmentalist into the room, they'd say, you know, what, he thinks it's all about us? So I think both those sides are there, but that we're imagining their version of the Big Bang leads him is actually to think about us and our frailty. Other responses to having these two guys as your conversation partners for the first verse of Genesis?
I was going to say that been thinking about communication in general, how I can use a few words here, but with a few words, I can convey a lot of information. And the assumption is that, you know, everything is in the Torah, so that each phrase or word contains a lot of information. But how do you get to that information from this little bit of data? I was watching my granddaughter, Maggie, who's in first grade, doing addition. And she's doing this odd thing where she splits numbers and then groups them and puts them together and whatever. And thinking about how there are different methods to add numbers, but you still get to the answer in different ways. And we're looking at different methods of taking brief tidbits of language and discovering what the meanings are that are in there, and there are different methods to do that. And it's almost as if you know, the commentators are sort of teaching methods of, you know, okay, so if you look at another verse and you see this is the kinds of reasoning or things you can do to sort of figure out what it's actually saying. It's not just saying the words, there's more here.
I love that. And what it's making me think is that in those grammatical comments, what they were doing was saying, you know, we're going to assume that language works the same way all across the Tanakh, so we can use these other cases to help us understand this formulation. And in these latter comments, it's almost as though, I'm test driving this, understand me to be saying it in a light pencil, not in pen. They are generating alternative versions of the verse imaginatively to let us see, Bob, what's at stake in the version that got picked. So Rashi's comment, it's as though he's saying, let's think for a minute what this would have meant if it just said Elohim. But it doesn't. It says Elohim, and then it says Adonai Elohim. And we have Ibn Ezra saying, let's think for a minute what it would have meant if it said Yud-He Vav-He instead of Elohim here. But it doesn't, right? So there's weirdly a kind of imaginative exercise of creating the versions that they imagine didn't come to be for very specific reasons. And that is grounded in what we had talked about the first week, that they think that every word is significant. But there's like a fundamentally comparative exercise both on the grammatical side and on this more midrashic side that, Bob, until you said that, I don't think I had seen. So thank you. Okay, it's 1:02. I'm Debbie. Are we scheduled for June? What's our plan? You're
Yeah,
mute.
scheduled for June. It's our last class, sadly.
Okay.
Hopefully not forever. We'll have to see what the future brings and your availability is. But yes, we are scheduled of the first week of next month.
Great. So we'll keep on keeping on. I think we may be up to a new source sheet. Oh, no, it's the same source sheet, but we'll move to Golden Calf
All right.
for our last week.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you as always.
Nice to see you
Delightful.
all.
Sure, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Elsie.
Thank you.
We'll
Love
see you
it.
again. All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.